So I'm switching my attention between him and this thing, and then it starts crossing the top of the office along the back wall, and he's sitting along that back wall, so I could see him and track that at the same time. And then it starts coming down the left-hand wall toward me, and I'm like, "What is going on here?" And I'm like, "What's it going to do when it gets here?"
There's a
And
force in all of us that science knows nothing about, the force of fear.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Induced Fear. I am your host, Oscar, and I have my co-host and fiance, Tate, with me. And we are here with Jerry Marzinsky, a man who has over 35 years of working with and studying the thought process of psychotic and criminally insane. You have been a retired licensed psychotherapist. Is that correct?
yeah, I dropped my license because I was afraid they'd go after it.
Yeah.
They didn't like what I was saying.
Oh, yeah, no. And from all that I have looked up when it came to your work, also your book, An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower. And you did that with Sherry Sweeney.
Right.
That's correct, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, when she told me about your work, I was like, this is incredibly interesting. uh, and she was very excited. She's usually not here with me, but she really wanted to be a part of this one.
Yeah, she's a nice addition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I want to thank you for coming on to the show. I mean, you've done so much when it came to people who were deemed schizophrenic and were told there's like nothing you can do. Just pop a pill and that's it.
Mhm.
Don't ask questions, don't question the voices, just pop a pill and that'll help out until we have to increase that dosage.
Yeah, that's pretty much true. They haven't the establishment, psychiatric establishment, the psychological establishment hasn't done any research whatsoever on the voices themselves. It's like they reminded me of the old Egyptian priests that will go, "We hereby pronounce that this is true because we said so." You know, they didn't do any investigation whatsoever. And then when I started looking into it, they weren't hallucinations at all. It turned out that they were actually entities, and very nasty ones.
Yeah, I would imagine. If all, I mean, there are stories of people who hurt themselves. They hurt other people because of these voices. They say that the voices told me to do this.
Yeah,
Um,
and that happens in court all the time. I didn't do it. The voices told me to do it, or I don't remember doing it. The voices did that. They don't believe in spirits. Negative spirits.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
Now, when you
go ahead.
went to school, well, you went to Temple University,
Hmm.
um, and how did that all? Because I know it does it start there, and then you start to notice these patterns of lies and them telling you not to question certain things. Was it
Well,
at Temple?
Temple's where it kind of started, and what I hated
Okay.
about studying psychology is it wasn't like engineering or computer science or something where you can go into a lab and test out and see for yourself what they're saying. They
Yeah.
just give you these volumes of books. Say, well, this is the truth. You just memorize it and spit it back to us. I didn't like that at all. But I was raised not to trust authority. I mean, from the very get go, I didn't trust authority. So that made me very, very nervous. I didn't like that, you know. And it was like I never as an undergraduate, even as a graduate, you can't get into a mental health center to check things out for yourself. They won't let you in there. They won't let any researchers in there. They won't let researchers into psych hospitals. So all this research that's being done, what is being done by the universities who have been taken over by the Rockefellers, back in the 50s. So the whole medical system was taken over by them in the 50s. They paid for something called the Flexner Report, which uh, they used to take over the medical schools and said, "Listen, the only the only real medicine is pharmacological medicine. So if you're not teaching about pills and what pills do what, you're not welcome here. So they closed down a whole bunch of medical schools that weren't teaching that, and said in order for you to get a license to graduate medical students, you've got to teach pharmacological medicine. So they had no choice; they had to move to that. They were forced, and so stuff like the Tesla violet ray, naturopathy, um, uh, you know, all the different kind of stuff that was coming out at the time, um, was banned. So they made it illegal to teach that, and any any doctor who tried was at risk of his license.
Yeah.
Well, I find that really interesting because I actually went to school for psychology, and
God help
schizophrenia
you.
was something. Yeah. Schizophrenia was like, one of the first things they taught us. And I remember like they drilled it into our head that schizophrenia is incurable. It requires medication to even live like the semblance of like a normal life. And the interesting thing that they definitely drilled in was that the brain shrinkage that you talk about. And they were always like, well, we don't know if the shrinking of the brain is caused by the schizophrenia or, if the schizophrenia causes the shrinkage, but they never mentioned that medication could be the cause of the brain shrinkage.
Well, it's proved that it was, it,
Hmm.
and they didn't like that. They started screaming bloody murder when that came out. Um, they said it's the schizophrenia. It's not our medications. It's the schizophrenia, and
Yeah.
that's so they attacked the research. So the researchers went back and they started feeding those drugs to mice and rats and monkeys, and they all found that their brains were shrunk like walnuts too, with a long enough use of that stuff. They discovered that in the big psychiatric hospitals like I used to work in. Uh, my first job was with a one of the biggest psychiatric hospitals on the planet. There were like 10,000 patients there when
Wow.
I got there. So when they started doing autopsies on the ones that died, they saw that their brains were shrunk. You know, and they wrote up the research on it, and big pharma went nuts. They didn't like that at all. Um, so they proved that it was due to their neuroleptic drugs. Um,
Well,
and
yeah, because especially,
they're still denying it.
yeah,
And,
because especially they associate things like twitching and certain spasms that happen when taking the medicine. They associate that with the drug, but when it comes down to like the brain shrinking, they're like, no, it couldn't possibly be. It couldn't possibly be the medicine.
well, it is the medicine.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
what was even more despicable was at the state hospital when the neuroleptic symptoms started to show up, the shaking, the quivering, the tongue darting, like that. Lots of times they wouldn't cut down on the medicine. They would just administer cogentin to hide those symptoms while they continued to rot the patient's brain out. There was
Yeah.
nobody watching out for those people. Um, they didn't care, so they just kept doing it. So, and one thing that struck me as uh, real strange when I got there, nobody was interested in finding out what those voices were saying. It was clear that the schizophrenic's abnormal or violent behavior was due to uh, them listening to these voices. So they listen to the voices and then they get all stirred up, and they say, "Well, the voices told me to do this. The voices told me to do that." But not one of them. I mean, there were hundreds of staff at this place. Not one of them was interested in what those voices had to say. Yeah.
And what was the leading the first lie that really like set you on this path to being the person to ask the questions and ask about these voices?
Well, the first one kind of occurred in undergraduate school. This is before I ever set foot in a mental health center or a psychiatric hospital. Uh, and I had an abnormal psychology course that I was fascinated with. I mean, it was like, what's going wrong with these people? They didn't put anything in there about what was going wrong with them. They just put in detailed description of the disorders that they were suffering. Okay? Um, and I found that kind of odd. And then the professor assigned us a paper written by a clinical psychologist that said basically, if two lunatics met each other and both of them thought they were Justin Trudeau, one of them would have to drop his identity and change to something else. And I'm like, why would they have to do that? I mean, they're both crazy. Why would one of them have to drop his identity because the other one had it? Didn't make any sense to me. You know, so there was no way to check it out because they won't let students. Matter of fact, I never ever saw a researcher on the front lines in any of the psychiatric institutions I've worked in my entire life, and I worked in virtually all of them. Private psychiatric hospitals, public psychiatric hospitals, county psychiatric hospitals, state psychiatric hospitals, mental health centers, um, outpatient stuff, the prisons. I never, ever saw a researcher on the front lines studying anything. They won't let them in.
Wow.
And even if visitors came in, like a legislator or something like they were surrounded with staff that would not let them talk to any of the inmates. So all that research that they're putting out came from the universities. And the motto of the universities is public or perish. You either keep publishing or you're out of here. And they don't matter whether they're publishing junk or not. And when I was in the PhD program, I saw that. I said, "Well, I want to do something meaningful," and my advisor said, "No, don't worry about that. Just do this research on depression and just add, one way or the other, just add to it and just get it published." I'm like, "Well, I don't want to do that." No, let's just do that. That's what they do. It's like, and I'm like, "What?" I found out later that one big institution went back and started replicating these studies that psychology put out all over the country. And this was a big research organization. They found that 80% of the research that psychology published was pure garbage. It could not be replicated. So it's crap. It's just pure
Yeah.
crap. So um, when I met that guy, I was doing rounds on the second floor of the psychiatric unit, and I saw a new patient that I don't recognize. And our job was kind of to keep eye on these guys, and if they're getting out of control, to turn them over to psychiatry to drug them. Okay? Because there was no use talking to them back then. This was in the 70s. Trying to counsel with a schizophrenic was like trying to talk to a toad. I mean, it just there was no response. That just didn't matter. Whatever you said to them just didn't matter. Um, whatever was in them was overwhelming them. So I saw this new guy on the unit, and I was kind of creeping up behind him. So my psychology course is just like yours. I didn't catch your name. What was it?
Katie.
Katie. Okay,
Yeah.
just like an undergraduate, Katie. They all they said was these are hallucinations. Okay,
Hmm.
schizophrenics hallucinate. It's auditory and visual hallucinations. So hallucinations, I thought, well, they're all over the place. They're just up and down and right, wrong, and they're just random. That's not what I started seeing. These people were walking around. It appeared that they were talking to themselves, but they were carrying on a conversation with somebody that I couldn't see. So it was like listening to somebody talk on a telephone, where you can hear what they're saying, but you can't hear what was coming in. Okay? So I was creeping up on this guy. Even then, I was curious. What are they hearing? What are these voices telling them? I was creeping up on this one guy who was carrying on an animated conversation with somebody I couldn't see. And you could tell there was a period of time where he would talk and then he would be quiet and he would be listening and then he'd go, yeah, but, da da da, and he'd respond. And I'm like, that's interesting. So I got close to him. I was trying to listen and he caught me. So he turns around and I said, well, I'm Jerry. I'm the psych on this unit. Um, I hadn't seen you here before. I was wondering, did you just get in? And he goes, yeah, I just got here a few days ago. And I said, well, what's your name? And he looks me in the eye and he says, well, I'm Jesus Christ. And I thought for a second, I look him in the eye and I go, no, no, you can't be Jesus Christ because I am. And I sat there and I'm going, what's he going to do? You know, is he going to give up his Jesus Christ identity? And I'm sitting there waiting for him. He looks up and he's thinking and he goes, then he comes to a decision. He looks back at me. He goes, okay, we can both be Jesus Christ. And he strolls off. And I said, what else did they lie to me about?
Yeah.
And this was a clinical psychologist who published this.
Yeah. Well, if it's in the book, you have to just take what they say as a gospel, if you will. If it's in
That
their, if it's in
that's
their book.
exactly what they were counting on. So I'm like what else? What else did they lie about? So when I got to the psychiatric hospital after I graduated from graduate school, um, one other thing they taught in undergraduate and graduate school was that schizophrenia and all mental illnesses are due to a biochemical imbalance of the brain. Okay? And they publish this in all the research. They publish it in their and everything. They teach it in the colleges. They teach it in the medical schools. Um, but one thing I noticed is that they never took a baseline. So if there's a chemical imbalance of the brain, you'd think you'd want to know what chemicals were out of balance and by how much. You know, Never did I see a psychiatrist give any kind of lab test, EEG, EKG, any kind of objective test to measure, what chemicals in the brain were out of balance. And there's what is like 30, 35 different neurotransmitters in the brain. Which ones are out of balance? How do they know what to treat? So I'm watching them, and time after time, they just talk to the guy. That they do an initial intake, and then they go, "Okay, we're going to start you on this drug." There was no test. They had no idea what was out of brain or out of balance or by how much. So I asked one of them one time. I said, "If this is a chemical imbalance causing this, how do you know what you're treating? How do you know, what to make put back in balance? How do you know what's out of balance by how much? How do you know that?" And the psychiatrist goes, "Oh, the drug companies tell us what to do. They do all the research. We just follow their uh, whatever they suggest." And I'm like thinking, what are you nuts? It's like you let the fox loose in the hen house. What are you talking about? You go, no, yeah, that's what we do. It turns out that they have no idea what chemicals are out of balance in the brain by how much. They don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be, and they're teaching this crap in all the universities all over the Western world.
Yeah. I mean, I've had like both from school and personal experience with SSRIs. I think they just came out with an article that said like they found that SSRIs don't specifically help with depression because they don't even
Right?
know that serotonin is an issue with depression.
Yep.
But years back,
This,
I
this
had,
is this is it right here.
yeah, exactly. And so years ago, I had, just a series of unfortunate events. I went to therapy, and immediately the therapist was like, I think you should see a psychiatrist. I think you should be on antidepressants. And like, just out of desperation, I was like, sure. The psychiatrist spent all of 30 minutes with me,
Well, you're
asked me
lucky.
no question.
Usually it's 15.
Yeah, but she asked me no questions about my health, no questions about my lifestyle. She was just like, "Yeah, you need Prozac. That'll cure you." And then it just became from like 10 milligrams of Prozac to 60 milligrams, and then all these other medications to deal with the symptoms. I was, the side effects of the Prozac. And I was like, I woke up one morning and I'm like, I'm a 26-year-old woman who's physically healthy. why am I on 5 medications because I
Mhm.
was sad, you know? And at that point, it was just like, what am I doing to myself? And the irony of it all was it never made me feel better. It just muted everything I was
Mhm.
feeling, you know? It didn't cure anything.
No, they
And
don't.
they don't at all. And it was so interesting because before I had discovered you a couple of months before, I started thinking like maybe like mental health, there is something demonic about like mental health disorders, you know, from like OCD to depression, like all of that. And and I just started like changing the way I was thinking about it. And 2 months later, I actually heard you on Owen Benjamin, and you were like talking about exactly what I had been thinking. I was like, what an interesting synchronicity that was. But it was just like really refreshing to like have an actual, you know, someone that was in that line of work say, no, there is actually something spiritual about, you know, mental health crisis.
Yeah, yeah, especially with schizophrenia. You know,
Mhm.
um, yeah, there's nasty side effects to all those medications,
Oh
and
yeah.
all they do is dumb you down. They don't
Mhm.
cure anything, and it's all a scam by big pharma. And it started off in 1980s. Um, it was the late 1980s when Prozac came out, and that's when the idea of a chemical imbalance hit the psychiatric market. I mean, that's when and it was due to a lie by the drug company Eli Lilly, and a psychiatrist named Peter Brigham in 1991 exposed all this in his book Toxic Psychiatry. So he said the drug company Eli Lilly advanced the chemical imbalance theory as a marketing scheme to sell their new drug Prozac. There wasn't any demonstrable evidence showing that depressed patients had any chemical imbalance at all, but Lilly ran with it, even though they knew it was a lie, that there was no backing for it. Before long, psychiatrists and psychiatric patients alike were believing this lie that it was a chemical imbalance in their brain that these drugs somehow set right. It was a total lie. It was a misconception. They fed it. They have oodles of money. The drug companies are they're crawling with money. They're making $14 billion a year selling antidepressant drugs, and 14.7, I think, billion. Now we're not talking million. We're talking billion a year selling antipsychotic drugs. Neither one of which cures anything whatsoever. So the influence of profits. Uh, you know, Here's one of the researchers said the influence that the pharmaceutical companies uh, have a drive for profits are having on every aspect of medicine is so blatant now that you'd have to be deaf, blind, and dumb to not see it. Uh, we've just allowed them to take over, and it's our fault, the whole medical
Mhm.
community. Okay. To this day, there exists not a single biological test for any mental disorder, despite the psychiatric mafia's claim to the contrary. There's not a single peer reviewed article that can be accurately cited to directly support claims of serotonin deficiency in any disorder. While there are many articles that present counter evidence, Jeffrey Laplace, another psychiatrist, says in Serotonin Depression, said there's a disconnect between the advertisements and the scientific literature. I mean, there's no connection. So
Yeah.
this chemical imbalance stuff is a bunch of crap, and they're still putting it out. You know, now they say, and you go to look up what the cause of schizophrenia, and they'll go, "Oh, it is believed that it is a chemical imbalance." They're still doing it to sell drugs.
Yeah. They'll put in the truth of like this is what we believe,
Yes,
but also you're not allowed to question it. You're not allowed to question what
no.
we're saying here. Um,
Well, you look at who can question it. It's biochemists, and they got away with that for close to a decade. Before biochemists kind of, hey, let's look into this. You know,
yeah.
that before that they were using genetics. Oh yeah, there's a genetic link. They haven't found any genetic link either. So when the geneticists finally got around to looking into it, they go, we don't see a genetic link to schizophrenia or mental illness. And they responded back, well, oh, we're sure it's a genetic link. It's a bunch of genes all mixed up together. It's not just one gene. It's a we'll figure it out one of these days, but we know it's the genes. You know, lie after lie after lie after lie. So
They say all they can so that they can keep selling and making
so they
more
yeah, yep,
of a profit.
yep. And the lines to get into a psychiatrist's office now are ridiculous. There's a new energetic psychotherapy I can talk about later that works so much better than these drugs, and it fast, and it provides a cure, and the symptoms vanish. They're gone. It's all energetic. 'Cause your thoughts are energetic, your feelings are energetic, your memory is energetic, your spirit is energetic. This works with energetics, and it works amazingly well. It's called the MACE
Yeah.
energy method.
Yes,
So this biochemical imbalance crap was the second big lie that I saw. And here we would have these drug salesmen show up every once in a while at the state hospital. And we loved them because they gave us free lunches. So we'd go listen to their garbage. And, I questioned some of them, and they go, well, we don't know. They were very evasive. They had no answers. Um, so that was one of the first big lies that I saw there. Um, the influence that big pharma had on this stuff. Um, what was the second one? Um, oh, the DSM. Yeah, their Bible. Their DSM Bible. It's like the Bible of psychology and psychiatry.
I know, which keeps changing, contradicting itself constantly.
But yeah, the garbage that they add. It's
Hmm.
every single one. Not one of the 200. I think there's 296 of them now. There's not a objective test for any of those mental illnesses in there. Not a single objective test. It's all subjective garbage that the psychiatrists have built this myth that they know more about anybody else about these things. So these are basically descriptions of a wide range of human behavior that they've taken and they've pathologized. They've turned them into disorders. So, there's a group of psychiatrists who votes these disorders in. They meet like once every 3 years, and they come in with all these new ideas for mental illnesses. And two-thirds of those psychiatrists have direct ties to the pharmaceutical industry. So
of
what
course.
they appear to be doing is like, oh, we got this mental illness here, and a new guy comes in. I got one, and he goes, yeah, here's one, and this is the symptoms, and and then they think, well, can we come up with some kind of drug to treat this and make a profit off it? And if they can't, they kind of wash it out because their business is dishing out drugs. Psychiatry
Mhm.
are the drug dealers for the psychiatric mafia.
Yeah,
None of
and they
none
have
of
such good PR too, because
Oh
any kind
yeah.
of alternative treatment, immediately you're like, "Oh, you're a whack job."
Hmm.
Vitamins don't do anything, holistic treatment does nothing, praying does nothing, and it's just like, you really do look like a lunatic when you're like, "I'm gonna explore something else." And they're like, "No, medication only, and you're killing yourself if you don't choose this."
Yeah, yeah. It's like yeah. If you don't take our medicines, we're not responsible for what you do.
Yeah.
And those drugs, none of them. I mean, in the United States alone, there's 50,000 people kill themselves every year, and a good majority of them are on antidepressant or antipsychotic drugs. That's as many as died in Vietnam, and the number's increasing every single year. It's not going down. There's more psychiatrists, there's more psychologists, there's more psychiatric drugs on the planet than has ever been in the history of mankind, and yet we're sicker. There's more
Mhm.
psychiatric patients. The psych hospitals are overloaded. The prisons are overloaded with psychiatric patients. You know, the mental health centers are overloaded. These drugs are not curing anything. They're not making anything any better. And these people are making a massive profit on it. So they just keep fabricating these mental illnesses. You know, in 1952, there was 106 of them. Okay? In 1980, there were 256. And now there's 297. So they're just making them up, and they're putting them in there as they go. You know, there's no blood tests, there's no lab tests, there's no X-rays, there's nothing to verify any of those. Not a single one of those diagnoses that they have. They need them for insurance, so you got to put some kind of diagnosis for insurance. They need them for diagnosing people into classes of behavior. Um, but there's nothing to them. They vote them in, they vote them out. Okay? So Southern Bell Syndrome, I heard used to be in there. Um, they have they have something called the mathematics disorder. So if you don't like math, you're disordered. Uh, Caffeine intoxication disorder. You drink too much caffeine, you've got a disorder. Sibling relational disorders. Uh, the kids fighting. That's a sibling relational disorder.
Well, that was one thing I had brought up recently because, like, just on social media now, you see everyone is overdiagnosed. Everything is a disorder, like you said. And I had brought that up once to a coworker. I was like, I think people are just way too overdiagnosed. Like any personality trait that they don't like is automatically some sort of disorder that they're using as like a shield for their bad behavior. And then it's just an excuse to like pump someone full of medication. It's like, oh, you can't sit still for 20 minutes? Here's some medication for that. Oh, you get anxiety when you have to publicly speak? Here's some medication for that. I mean, I even worked in a pharmacy, and most of the patients were on Xanax and statins. And when I would like check in the medication, Xanax was like $5 for like the whole bottle of it. And they were
Wow, and
selling it
that's
for
addictive
like,
too.
and then they were selling it for $20 a pill, basically, when your insurance covered it. I was like, wow, that is a really good, you know, way to get money, because it's like $5 for a bottle of like 200 and you're selling them at $20 a pill. Talk about profit.
Yeah, they're scalping us. If you go to the border in Mexico now, you cross the border, you can get these psychiatric drugs without a prescription. You just go in the pharmacy, and
Hmm.
you can get them. They're not abusable drugs. They're awful drugs. I mean, the side effects are just they suck. They're really bad. And with the antipsychotics, they're even worse. Nobody wants to take those drugs. Even the people that need them don't want to take them. But the
Hmm.
psychiatrists are like clutching onto every penny they can get, and the drug companies are right behind them. So you cross the border and you go into a pharmacy in Mexico and you say, "Listen, I want a month's worth of Risperdal." You'll get it for like $75 instead of 800 that you pay here in the U.S.
Yeah.
You can go see a psychiatrist once if you want. He gives you a diagnosis. He recommends the pills you take. After that, you don't have to keep going into them for a prescription. You just go into the pharmacy and say, "I want this." If it doesn't work for you, then you go see the psychiatrist again. But you're not forced to go see a psychiatrist to get a prescription for these drugs. They make you come back over and over and over again. And then they ask, "Well, are your drugs working?" "Oh, no, I don't like them. There's just they're really bad. They make me feel well. Let's try this other one." So the other one, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one, and then
Yeah.
well, let's raise this one. Let's lower that one. It's a scam. It's a friggin' scam. Nobody's getting any better.
No,
Mm-mm.
it doesn't quell the voices that people hear. It doesn't
No.
change their feelings. That low vibrational negative, those parasitic voices that these people hear are still going to be there. They're
Yes.
receiving no cure.
Yeah. They might lower the intensity a little bit, but for the vast majority of them, those voices are still there. You know. Now, some of them can function on those drugs, and certainly there's a place for them. Believe me, working with the criminally insane, there's a place for those drugs. You don't want those guys walking around undrugged. They're
Yeah.
very violent. They're totally under control by the voices. Um, They can be very nasty hombres. Um, so there's a place for them. There's people that are so far gone that I couldn't. You can't reach them. They're too far gone. But for most people, stuff like the Mace Energy method um, would work wonders for them. I mean, it actually cures the psychological problems they have, and they're gone. They're gone, and it's a lot cheaper than psychiatric medications.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so let me see, what was the second big scam was this DSM, where they just make these things up. They have what was some of the other ones? They had Paris syndrome, I think it was Florence syndrome. Well, they call it sexual orientation disturbance, which is homosexuality. Florence syndrome, which is being overwhelmed by beauty, such as in Florence, Italy. That's symptoms are fainting and dizziness. They recommend it be treated with antidepressant drugs. Go, go figure. Paris
Yeah.
syndrome, experienced mostly by Japanese visiting France. It includes the symptoms include depression, anxiety, feelings of persecution. Um, what in my day would just been culture shock.
Yeah.
So they just keep making these things up and putting them in there, and then they just diagnose you, and they have. You're not going to go into a psychiatrist's office and not come out with a diagnosis or some kind of medication.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And nobody's being cured. Nobody's getting any better. I mean, what they do is they tamp down the symptoms, you know. And I've only seen in very few cases where the voices actually disappeared. That did happen, but very few cases where that did happen.
And were there
Um,
multiple things that in doing your studies that you saw that worked when it came to these voices? Like,
well, one of the things I saw early was that these voices were running patterns, you know. And the first pattern was that they were consistently and irreversibly negative. They were constantly negative. They never said anything good. It was all negative stuff. Um, I have a list of those somewhere, but that was the first one, and it was like, why are they consistently negative? They're calling them hallucinations. I worked in the last 10 years. I worked doing psych crisis in the hospital emergency rooms all over Tucson. So, at the state hospital, I saw hallucinations. I mean, they were there. There were medical hallucinations. There were drug hallucinations. They were random. They were all over the place. They weren't the same. They were all different. With schizophrenics, those hallucinations are all irreversibly, consistently, unswervingly negative. You know, they would tell the patients, "You're ugly. You're stupid. You're no good. You're rotten. Nobody likes you. Um, you're a detriment to everybody. Why don't you just go and kill yourself?" They were always negative. If something bad happened, they'd jump in and they'd go, "It's your fault." Blame them. They'd like throw gasoline on the fire. So um, I was going like, why, if they're actually hallucinations, as the psychiatric mafia says they are, how come they're not random like all other hallucinations? How come they're following this negative pattern? You Uh, and if they're running patterns, it doesn't make any sense that they're hallucinations, because hallucinations don't run patterns. So that was my first question. So, like, something strange is going on here. And if they did tell the patient anything positive, it always ended up like half truths or something to get their trust, where they could come back and stab them in the back later. So it took me about a year to figure out how to talk to these schizophrenics about their voices, because they did not want to talk about them. And I didn't know at the time that the voices did not want them talking about them, and that if they did, they were punished by the voices. Uh, and on the real front, talking about their voices had no positive benefit for them. They would end up in front of the psychiatrist again, being ordered more meds. If they were living at home, their parents would be worried about them. what are these voices? And the voices would be telling them to attack their parents, and they would cause such a commotion that the parents would lock them in their rooms and say, "Get away!" And that's about the worst thing you could do to one of these guys. But there was no positive benefit to telling anybody about their voices. Their friends would leave and go, "Well, you're full of evil spirits. You're full of demons. We don't want to hang around you." So they'd lose their friends. They'd lose their jobs. Their parents would worry about them. There was no positive benefit. So I had to find out, like, piece by piece. Like, one would trust me to give me one little piece of information. Another one would give me another piece of information. So every time I met a new schizophrenic, I'd say, "I know this much about the voices. Can you tell me more?" And eventually they saw I know more than any of the other staff. So they would go, "This guy's really serious. He really wants to know what these things are." And they would start giving me more information. The more information I had, the more I could feed back to them and say, "Well, I know this about him, and I know this about him, I know this about him, I know this about him. What else can you tell me?" So uh, I started out doing that at the state hospital, but one of the schizophrenics, the voices didn't like me asking questions about him, so he went to the psychiatrist and told the psychiatrist that I was asking questions about his voices and that it upset him. Okay? So at the state hospital, there weren't any police around. There was a police department, but there weren't any. They had attendants around. They didn't have any security. They didn't have any. There were no security. It was you and the patient and the attendants. So if you set one of these guys off, it caused a lot of trouble. Because you had to wrestle him down to the ground or give him a shot. Somebody was going to get hurt, and they were assaulting psychiatrists at a rate higher than any other staff at the hospital. And I'm like, you know, what are these people telling, or what are the schizophrenics telling these psychiatrists in 15 or 20 minutes that, or what's the psychiatrist telling them that's upsetting them so bad that they assault the psychiatrist? Because it wasn't nurses that were getting pummeled. It wasn't psych nurses. It wasn't uh, uh, counselors. It wasn't psychologists. It wasn't regular nurses. Uh, the attack rate on psychiatrists was almost as high as it was with attendants that were spending 24 hours a day around these people. So I'm like wondering, why is that? What are these psychiatrists telling these people that are bringing on these attacks in 15 or 20 minutes? It boggled my mind. It took me 7 years to figure that out. And uh, it turned out that what the voices were telling these schizophrenics was that the side effects, these rotten side effects of these medications, were symptoms of being poisoned. Okay? So they were telling the schizophrenics, the psychiatrist is poisoning you, and all these symptoms you're feeling from these medications are symptoms of you being poisoned. Okay? The dry mouth, you know, all the all the symptoms of here's Geodon. You know, this is just symptoms of one of the antipsychotics: skin rash, feeling of restlessness, inability to sit still, constipation, dizziness, drowsiness, excessive saliva production, extrapyramidal disease, that's uncontrolled movements, generalized weakness, headache, nausea, weight gain, chest pain, fast heartbeat, low potassium. You know, these things are dangerous. So these are the side effects, and in fact, they were being poisoned. You know, these drugs are toxic, and those side effects are toxic responses to these toxic medications. So the voices were right. The psychiatrist was, in a way, uh, poisoning them. Okay? And then the voices would point to all these symptoms and say, "Look at you're being poisoned. The psychiatrist is poisoning you." And then when they get, usually male schizophrenics, when they would increase their medications, that set them off, and they would attack the psychiatrist. Because the voices were telling them they were being poisoned by the psychiatrist. So the assault rate for psychiatrists was almost as high as it was for attendants that were spending 24 hours a day around these people. So um, you had that going on. So the hospital psychiatrists didn't like anybody messing with them, with schizophrenic patients, because their view of them were that they were irrational, and they were had hair triggers, and that you shouldn't do anything nothing to upset them that didn't absolutely have to be done. It was like an unwritten rule of this state hospital. You do not upset schizophrenics. So when one of them went to complain to the psychiatrist, the next morning I found myself in his office on the red carpet with him saying, "You will not." When one of your patients came and told me you were irritating him with questions about the voices, you will not do that anymore. These are hallucinations, and you're making the patient worse by asking questions about the voices. You're reinforcing their hallucinations, and ordered me to stop. So that happened twice at the state hospital. So I had to really tone it down there, and kind of fly under the radar. I didn't completely stop, but I had to be very careful not to
Yeah.
set them off, not to upset them. Um, and where you learn the most is when you set them off. You don't learn anything by placating them and treating them with kid gloves. You don't learn anything about
Yeah.
the voices. You know? I always knew those voices were enemies. I mean, they were always enemies. So that was the first pattern that came up, the negativity. The second one that came up was religion. The voices hated these people going to church. They hated them reading the Bible. They hated them reading any religious material. Um, And I noticed that first when the preacher was giving ice cream socials down in the auditorium in this big psychiatric rehab center. None of my schizophrenics on the ward ever went down there. And I went, well, that's odd. They're all sitting on the ward when there's music and there's ice cream and there's dancing, and they're having a good time down there. They were all sitting on their bed staring at the ceiling or reading monster magazines. I mean, it was like, what's with that? So I noticed that, and I went, "That's odd." And then the second time it happened, there they were again. None of them went down there. So I'm like, "What's going on with these guys?" So I started talking to them. I'm like, "Why aren't you down there with the rest of the guys? Why aren't you down with the preacher having ice cream?" Because ice cream and cake were hard to come by, in the state hospital, and music and dancing. They wanted no part of it. I asked, "What's going on?" Well, I don't believe in God. I mean, I prayed to God a long time, and He didn't help me out any. I don't like preachers. Um, I don't want to go to church. I don't feel good in the church, and so I started asking all the schizophrenics that they would come in. Started asking them questions. What happens when you go to church? They broke down into three different categories. If the voices were weak, they would shut up in the church. If they were medium strength, they would kick up and get louder, and they would drown out the preacher and start mocking him and making fun of the Bible and saying, "Why are you wasting your time in here?" and try to get him to leave voluntarily. If they didn't leave, they had to struggle to hear what the preacher was saying over the voices yelling all the time. So voices were very strong. The guy would get up and run out of the church, just run. You know. So it was very clear that the voices didn't like religion, didn't like God, didn't like preachers. They didn't like the mention of Jesus. The more questions I asked, one guy came in one time and he said, "Well, when my voices come, I pray the 23rd Psalm." And he said the voices act like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. So I said, "Well, that's interesting. That's something I can check out." So got copies of the 23rd Psalm and I started handing them out to all my schizophrenic patients. Said, "When the voices come, read this, and then come on back in a week and tell me what happens." So they would all come back and they said the voices hated it. They hated it. They don't like me reading the Bible. They don't like me going to church. It was very clear that they were anti-religious. And I'm like, well, what kind of hallucination would be anti-religious? It made absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
So that was the third pattern I saw. So I'm like, okay, no, that was the second. And I'm like, okay, two patterns so far. Hallucinations don't run patterns, and here's two patterns. Next one I noticed was that they were drained of energy. After the voices attacked them, they had no energy. They couldn't get out of bed. They didn't even get up to go for breakfast. They were just completely drained. And uh, I noticed that, and I'd ask the patients. I said, after the voices attack, how do you feel? They would admit, "Well, drained, absolutely drained. I don't have any energy whatsoever." And I'd ask them, "Well, you were just lying in bed, tossing and turning all night. What? Where'd your energy go? You didn't use it." The answer every time was, "I don't know." With all of them, "I don't know." You know? And so I started pushing them a little bit. I said, "I'd say, okay, if you've heard these voices for years, they've come tens of thousands of times, and every time they came, you were drained of energy. Where do you think your energy went?" "I don't know." Well, if you stuck your hand in a fire 10,000 times and each time you got burned, what's burning you? Well, they had no trouble. Oh, that's fire. I said, well, the voices have come 10,000 times, and each time they came, your energy level dropped to nothing. Where do you think your energy went? Oh, I don't know. Well, they were not allowed to see that. Some of them would go, the voices took it, like click, it clicked.
Yeah.
But they were being blocked from seeing that. All they knew is that they felt bad. They never thought about a correlation between their energy disappearing and them and the voices attacking them.
Yeah.
So what I did is did a little research study on it. It was like a subjective 1 to 10 scale. How much energy did you feel you had before the voices came? How much energy you feel after the voices came? And I'd hand it to them. You know, how much energy you felt had before? How much energy did you have after the voices came? Consistently, they had much less energy after the voices attacked them. So after I got 30 of these, we ran an analysis of variance on it, and it was statistically significant. There's something there. You know. But then when I was working in the ER, they didn't want you counseling with these patients that came in the ER. They just wanted them out. The doctors wanted them out so they could put medical patients in. They didn't know what to do with them, and a lot of the times, if they weren't suicidal or they weren't homicidal, we would have to release them. Okay, so if they weren't an imminent threat to themselves or somebody else, we'd have to let them go. So I was thinking, what information can I give them that would help them the most, where I might not get in trouble for it. So I had to be real careful who I was talking to, which ones I trusted. I had a gut feel. Um, the first thing that they needed to know is that the voices were not them. Because the voices would tell these patients, especially when I got to working in the prison, the prisoners would ask them, "What are you? Who are you?" And they would say, "We are you." So they wanted them to believe that the thoughts they were hearing in their mind coming from the voices were their thoughts. They belonged to them.
Like their inner voice. Like
Like
just
their inner voice, like the same voice you hear when you're just, every day you hear thousands of thoughts and your inner voice telling you this and telling you that and all this dribble. They just slip right in there, and then they put their thoughts in there and the person can't tell the difference. So what those feel like is intrusive thoughts, where you're walking along and you're just minding your own business, and then all of a sudden, you get this crazy thought to hit the guy in front of you, or to do something stupid or crazy that you would never normally do. Turn your car into oncoming traffic, or jump off a bridge or something like that. I had one guy write me. He said, "You're right. You're right. I was standing behind my boss the other day, and I had this intrusive thought come into my head to spit on the back of his head." He said, "I knew that wasn't me." So they hit us all. It's not just that schizophrenics they do; they hit us all. You know. So one of the problems we have is we think that because we experience thoughts in our head that they all belong to us. That's way wrong. You know, these things are constantly putting thoughts in all our heads. They're constantly running us down and running other people down. Um, and they don't they don't sound like anything other than your normal thoughts. So you have a normal tempo that you listen to your thoughts and you go, okay, that it doesn't vary. Um, there's no like, we are the voices and we're telling you this. It's nothing like that. They sound just like all the tens of thousands of other thoughts that run through your mind in a regular day. You know, the intent is very different. The intent is always destructive. It's destructive against you or somebody else. They'll tell a husband that the wife is cheating on him, or the boyfriend, the girlfriend is cheating on them, or vice versa. They'll put all these negative thoughts in there that cause consternation and turmoil, and they're hitting us all the time. It's just much more noticeable with schizophrenics. Right? So, from after working 7 years at the state hospital, I went back to the PhD program, and it was piled higher and deeper. It was just totally ridiculous. They they didn't know anything, and they acted like they did, and none of the stuff they were teaching would make a hill of beans on the clinical front lines. Right? I probably would have been better off had I went straight through and not spent 7 years working on the front lines of mental health. Um, it was just it was making me depressed and sick. And so after 2 years, it's like I can't handle this anymore.
Yeah.
So went back. I was working in mental health centers here in Tucson. I was working in the hospital emergency rooms again. And then a job came open in the psychology department of the state prison, which was a stable job, um, and one of the most stable jobs in Tucson. So I took that job, and here's the schizophrenics again. It's like by the time I got out of the state hospital, it's like these people are driving me crazy. I don't know what's going on with them. I can't figure it out. I just want to get away from them. So it's like get me away from them. So 2 years in the PhD program, I was away from them. I got a break, and then as soon as I got back into working in the psychology department, here's all these criminally insane schizophrenics in there, and here I was again. There they were, the same questions I had before. What are these voices? Uh, but the situation was way different because I had a lot more control in there. And if one of the schizophrenics went up to one of the captain of the security or one of the officers, or went to the warden and said, "Oh, the psych is asking me questions about the voices, and I don't like it. I don't like it." They'll go, "Get out of here. Go play in the traffic." It wouldn't even break the line where you pay any attention to it. You know? So I had a lot of freedom. So what I did is I got a whole group of schizophrenics that agreed to tell me in real time in our sessions what the voices were telling them while I was in there with them. Okay. So I got real time information back about what these things were telling these patients, and more patterns started coming out. So I had a group of like uh, maybe 10 or 15 all the time, you know, and they were different from the regular schizophrenics who didn't want to talk or didn't want to risk being punished by the voices because the voices didn't like them talking to me. So they had to pay a price to do that. The voices would give them headaches. They would start screaming at them when they came to my office. Uh, they would do all these different things to make them miserable, keep them awake all night, screaming at them. But these guys were real heroes. They just kept coming, um, kept feeding me information. So more and more of these patterns started showing up, um, and it was like, okay, what? And here's just a few of them. There's 23 of them. If you go to my website under articles, I think it is. These patterns are there. Okay, so this isn't like uh, you know the psychiatric mafia going, well, it's genetic, where people can't check it out. They can't go see that for themselves. Or it's a biochemical imbalance where you've got to be a biochemist to see for yourself what's going on. Anybody who's working with schizophrenics, who has a schizophrenic son or daughter, or has a family member who's schizophrenic, can go to these patterns and see that they're there. So this is the operational definition of the voices. This is what they are. They're negative. They're anti-religious. They foster and create negative emotion. They energetically drain their victims. They get louder after sunset. You know, they get louder when ignored. They foster self-destructive behavior. They foster isolation. They demand that they demand the attention of the victim. They maneuver for increased control over the victim. So what they're doing is they're pushing the person's personality out of the way as they're taking over. And they're trying to convince the person that those what they're saying, those thoughts that they're putting in their heads belong to them. If they believe that, they're screwed. So with the psychiatric mafia saying these are hallucinations, you know, it's like saying they're not real. Just they're not real. Just ignore them. And if they ignore them, they got louder. So that's another thing I found out. So if unless they realize that these voices are not them, are not who they are, their chances of recovery are virtually zilch. Because if the voices convince them that the voices, what they're telling them, is actually them, they're screwed. Because the voices will continue to tell them self-destructive, uh, tumultuous, negative, rotten stuff. They hate humans, and they will do everything they can to destroy that person. And if that person believes what they're saying, they're going to get in deeper and deeper and deeper. And psychiatry and psychology are fostering that. Oh yeah, they're hallucinations. They're not hallucinations. Right? They
Yeah.
have complete access to the schizophrenic's memory. They can go in there and they can pick out every rotten thing the schizophrenic has ever done because they're energetic. These things are energy. They're not physical. They're like thoughts are energy, memories energy, um, feelings are energy. It's all energy. It's all energy and vibration. They can go in there. They can pick out any thought or any bad thing that person's done. They can rub it in their face until get them feeling miserable, and then they feed off of the negative energy that they generate. So they're parasites. They're they're invisible parasites, and they hit us all. They demand that you not tell anybody about them. Um, they're consummate liars. You can't believe anything they say. They lie about everything. And if they're not lying, it's only to a half truth where they act like they're some kind of mystical being that is contacting the person and going, I'm Jesus Christ, or I'm this, I can help you out, or and they know things that about the person and the people around them that they shouldn't. The person himself doesn't know. With heroin addicts in the prison, when they ran out of heroin or they ran out of meth, especially with the meth addicts, the voices would tell them where to be and when to be there, and somebody would show up with the meth, complete stranger. They would tell them which houses to rob, when the people were up, where to go hide to avoid from the cops. Um, they knew stuff that the person themselves didn't know. Right?
Yeah.
Um, they steer the person away from anything that might foster joy or might generate joy. They don't want the person feeling good. They can manipulate feeling without speaking. You're sitting there just minding your own business. All of a sudden, you start feeling rotten for no reason. You know, they short circuit reason. You uh, they take advantage of boredom. So the worst thing a schizophrenic could do is get bored. They pass themselves off as the thoughts of the victim. They cause selective forgetting. So when I tell these people this is what you do to fight back, if they don't write it down, they'll have forgotten it by the time they left my office. They destroy any semblance of positive self-concept. They fill the persons with negative thoughts about themselves and everybody else, and it just goes on and on and on. So,
Yeah.
I started wondering. So, what happens? These patterns. So, what these are like is like when you get a magnet, okay, and you get a strong, what are those iodonium magnets with a very strong magnetic field? You can't see that magnetic field. You can't smell it. You can't taste it. You can't touch it. For all practical purposes, as far as you're concerned, it doesn't exist. You know?
Yeah. Oh, the electrical magnet, like
Yeah, yeah,
that you
yeah.
can turn on and off. Yeah.
Well, even the regular magnet. You know,
Yeah.
the magnetic field. You can't see it. You can't sense it. So you get a bottle of iron filings and you put that on top of the magnet. Now you can see the magnetic field. It's shown through the magnetic by the iron filings. Well, that's what these patterns are. These are like the iron filings for the voices. because the voices are energetic. This is how they manifest themselves. These are the patterns that they show, just like a magnetic field. That's the pattern of the magnetic field. Okay?
Yeah.
These things are energetic. So when psychiatry is prescribing drugs for the voices, it's the same thing as getting those drugs and getting, Thorazine or lithium or uh, any of these other antipsychotic drugs and pouring it on a magnetic field. If you make the pile high enough, it may interfere with the magnetic field somewhat, but it's not going to kill it. It's not going to make it go away. It's going to interfere with it a little bit. So
Yeah.
basically, what they're treating is symptoms, negative symptoms. Like um, not being able to sleep, like irritability, um, uh, violent behavior. It's all symptoms, and they're just drugging the brain. These things don't live in the brain. They're spiritual entities. Okay? You can't get rid of them with drugs. Your brain is like a radio receiver. It tunes into the frequency of these things. So, it's just like you get all the schoolboys hanging out with all the schoolboys, you get all the scientists hanging out with scientists, you get all the drug addicts hanging out with drug addicts, and all the schizophrenics hanging out with schizophrenics. It's the frequency. Okay? So drugging the radio receiver doesn't change the frequency.
Well, that's interesting because we actually know someone who suffers with hallucinations. But what's interesting is she only gets them in the summertime, and the doctors couldn't explain why. She would just go like manic and have these like strong hallucinations, and it would only happen in the summertime. And she always had a pattern like where you knew it was going to start. And then like fall, winter, spring, she's fine, but like as soon as it's summer, it like happened every single time. And I thought it was interesting because I was like, it's got to be like something with the energy of the summer because like summer's so high energy, and it must be like triggering something in her.
Plus,
Yeah,
it kept her inside because this was in New York, so you don't want to be outside in New York where it's hot and humid. And
yeah,
like you had said, was one of the patterns is to isolate that person, to make them isolated.
right.
And those were one of the factors that came into play when it came to her
Yeah,
Well, yeah,
episodes.
she was
yeah,
self isolating, and then she was just absolutely like in another world,
yeah.
with.
And so the voices want that because they don't
Mhm.
want any outside interference. Parents are enemies. Girlfriends or boyfriends are enemies. Anybody who tries to help the person is an enemy. What they want is that person locked up in a room where there's no interference with what they're telling that person to do or to believe. They don't want any interference. Anybody who tries to help them is an enemy.
Well,
So
yeah, and
what
that's what we saw in her too. Everyone was an enemy, and she was convinced that anyone helping her was doing black magic on her, and that like she was infested basically with like black magic from anyone that was trying to get her out of that.
that's the voices telling her that. So
Mhm.
people just get fed up with dealing with them, and they go, "Yeah, go lock yourself in a room and stay in there and get away from us. Give us some peace and
Mhm.
quiet." But that's the worst thing you could do to them because that now the voices have complete control with no interference, and they're telling them rotten stuff 24 hours a day. You and that's how people get hurt. It's uh, I know several people who tried to help schizophrenics, and they ended up in the hospital or seriously hurt or dead.
Yeah.
You know, so, um, let me see, where was I with the patterns? So I started wondering, okay, all these patterns are coming out. I'm like, well, what happens if I start throwing monkey wrenches into the patterns? Start interfering with those patterns. So getting them to do the opposite of what these things are telling them, or interfering with it. So I started devising all these different ways to kind of interfere with what these things were doing. And it wasn't very long before the so I'd give them a homework assignment, and then I'd see them once a week. Bring them in. Well, how'd that assignment go? How did the voices react to it? And they'd say, well, they don't like it. They don't like what you're doing. They don't like what you're telling us to do. They don't like me uh, doing any of these things. Um, they don't like it. They're telling me not to come here, and it was the reports were the same from all 15 or 20 of them. You know, the voices didn't like me mucking with the patterns. And then the next thing that happened one day was one of the guys I was working with. I'd been working with for 6 months. He was getting slowly. He was slowly getting better. He turns around in my doorway and he goes, looks at me as he's leaving. He looks at me and he goes, "You know what you're doing is dangerous, don't you?" And I just looked at him and it's like, "Where'd that come from?" You know. He turned around and walked away, and I'm like, "What's he mean? What's going on?" You know. I'm thinking, well, the voices are in his head. They're not in my head. They're not. They can't get me. They can't come out. Little did I know then at that time. So it was like one of those things I filed in the back of my head. I said, "Okay, this is a keeper," and I just planted it back there. And then as
It
I
was
was,
almost a monkey wrench in your they
well, it
you
was
were throwing monkey wrenches, and it was almost a monkey wrench back at you of,
it was
hey,
like
we're watching you.
it was like a warning, yeah.
Yeah.
But this was the patient telling me that because the voices wouldn't. Well, they might have been controlling him at that time. Because he did it like impulsively. He was about to walk out, and then he just turns around and he looks at me and he goes, "You know what you're doing is dangerous, don't you?" And I just looked at him like surprised. It didn't have, never crossed my mind. Yeah. So I kept going. We kept throwing monkey wrenches in there, um, and then let me see. The next guy that showed up was another guy who was also doing better. Um, he said the voices want to talk to you. That hadn't happened before. In 20 years prior, that had never happened. They'd never talked to me directly. It was always the patient was the middleman. You know, the patient would tell me what the voices were saying, and then I'd tell the patient will tell the voices to go stick their head in the toilet, or they didn't like me. It was clear they didn't like me, and I didn't like them. Um, so they would kind of a lot of times stay to themselves. And this guy shows up in the medical unit one day. I don't know how he got in because he didn't have a pass. Somehow he got in there, and he knocks on my door, and I was a little bit surprised. And he goes, "The voices want to talk to you." And I'm like, "What? They want to talk to me personally?" He goes, "Yeah, they want to talk to you personally." And I'm like, "Okay, come on in. Have a seat." And I closed the door, and it was like, I kind of braced myself, and I go, like, "Okay, what do they have to say?" And these words came out of his mouth: "You have no right to interfere with our way of life." And it was like, boom, because I didn't believe that these things were entities. I didn't want to believe that they were entities or evil spirits. I was thinking, well, it's something with their psyche. There's something wrong up there. Um, it's maybe it's something in their subconscious. It's something in there. It's not. I didn't want to believe that they were negative entities or demons or anything like that. And I kept, the evidence coming in was overwhelming. I think anybody else who had been in my place would have seen it maybe a year earlier, but I kept denying it. I didn't want to. Nah, nah, it can't be. When he told me that, I was like, boom. What was left of my denial system just collapsed. And then uh, after I kind of, I was sitting there stunned, and he said it wasn't me who said that. It was them. You know, I didn't say that. He was making that very clear. And it would have been dangerous for him to mess around with my head that way also. You know, I had a lot more power over him than he had over me for sure. Um, so he goes, that was them. And, you know, what did I say back to him? I said, tell them this. And he said, I don't have to tell them anything. They can hear you. They can see you. They can see and hear everything you're saying. And I never thought about that before. I thought it was the patient who had to somehow translate to whatever this entity is. But no, the entity was using his eyes and his voice. You know, it was actually a part of him, and it was seeing me just as he was. So that was another boom. You know, it was like it was then my denial system completely collapsed. I mean, just fell apart, and I was stunned. I was shocked. I closed my office. I didn't see anybody the rest of the day, and after a while, I just kind of shook it off. And if I wasn't a adrenaline junkie, I don't think I could have got through this. I mean, it was,
Yeah.
this was a job for an adrenaline junkie. You had to be an adrenaline.
Yeah.
It
But,
sounds more like you were doing exorcisms than like anything else.
well, it wasn't quite exorcisms. It was like interfering with what they were doing to the client.
Yeah.
You
Mhm.
know, it was like don't listen to them. Whatever they tell you, tell them the opposite. Um, you know, read the 23rd Psalm. It was all these different things that annoyed the voices. So when I found
Mhm.
something that they hated, absolutely hated, I would tell the patients to do it to them. Now I couldn't get away with that at the state hospital. I would have been fired. But the
Yeah.
prison is set up for violent behavior. So uh, thank heavens, none of these guys ever attacked anybody with because of this stuff. But reading the Bible, the 23rd Psalm, there were a number of things that the voices absolutely hated. So I'd tell these guys do all these things to them, and then come back and tell me what happened. You know, it turned out that they started getting weaker, especially when we found out that most of what they were telling these patients were lies, just total lies. You can't believe anything they say. You can't make any deal with them. They won't keep any deal. They lie about everything. So once they realized they were lies, that helped a lot. You realize they're liars, and that's how Sherry in our book she was hearing voices when she was younger. Um, so we decided to write this book together. Sherry, amazing journey through the psychotic mind. So it talks all about what I'm telling you guys about. Okay? Now Sherry was hearing voices when she was a young woman, and I didn't have anybody to talk to about these crazy things that were happening in the prison. So she was in prison reform, and I couldn't attack my own prison system because they'd fire me. But she was attacking the Alabama prison system, and I was giving her information about how to get the biggest rise out of the establishment there. Kind of, I was like her uh, coach, right? If you do this, this is how they're going to react. They're not going to like it if you say this. They're going to get scared if you say this. So I was her coach, and kind of one day I was telling her about one of these things that were happening with these patients that I was checking out, and I said, the strange thing happened at work today," and I started telling her, and she goes, "Oh, I know all about that." And I go, "What do you mean you know all about that? How do you know about that?" She goes, "Well, when I was a young woman, I was hearing these voices," and I couldn't believe it. It was like because she's one of the most spiritual people I know. Um, And she goes, "Yeah, yeah, I've heard them, and I beat them." So that was like, "You beat them?" So right away it had my attention. It was 10 years. I knew her 10 years before she admitted that. So that's how much of a stigma is with this
Yeah.
stuff. So when she told me that, I started hammering her with questions that only somebody who heard voices would be able to answer. And
Yeah.
bam, 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 she right on. You know, she was there. I mean, it was like I couldn't believe it. So now I had somebody to talk to. I could say this happened to me and that happened to me because there was a period of time where I thought I was going crazy. These weird things were happening to me, like the voice coming out. The next one was even worse. Um, knowing that these things were parasites, I was reading a book by Miguel Ruiz, who's a South American shaman, and he was talking about them being parasites. Uh, so I went, well, I'm going to bring this in, and I'm going to read it to my psychotic uh, inmates, and I'm going to ask them what they think about it. So the first one I brought in, I told them, well, I brought this in. I want to read it to you because this guy appears to be talking about the voices. I'd like your opinion on it because I was always asking. I was always hitting them with questions. Always. I mean, every time I saw them, I was asking them questions about the voices. Um, so I started reading, and I got to the part where um, that he was talking about the voices being parasites. So I look up and I say, I asked him, well, what do you think? And then this electrical crackling erupted right behind my head. Sounded just like an arc welder. It was loud, like crack, 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 crack. And I'm like, what's going on? It's like, and then it starts moving and it moves onto the wall, the right hand wall of my office, and starts moving up the wall, crackling very slowly. And I look at him and he's just staring at me with a zombie stare. And I ask him, do you hear that? And he doesn't answer me. He's just staring like straight ahead, like, just like he was out of it. And I'm like, what is going on? So I'm like, he might attack. So I push my chair back against the wall just in case he does attack. So I'm kicking back, and then I'm glancing between him and this noise, and I don't see anything. There's there, there's no light, but I could hear it crackling along the wall. It sounds just like an arc welder. So I'm switching my attention between him and this thing, and then it starts crossing the top of the office along the back wall, and he's sitting along that back wall, so I could see him and track that at the same time. And then it starts coming down the left-hand wall toward me, and I'm like, "What is going on here?" And I'm like, "What's it going to do when it gets here?" And then it jumps into this Rubbermaid trash can by my left leg, and I look down in there. There's nothing there, and it's just a foot or two away, crackling in this trash can, and there was nothing there, not even a sheet of paper. The inmate porter had cleaned it the night before, and then boom, it goes out just like that. It's gone, you know, and I'm like stunned. And I look at him, and he slowly gets up and he goes, "I gotta leave," and I'm like, "Yeah, you get the hell out of here, go, leave, go." So he gets up very slowly and he shuffles down the hall, and I get up and I start examining the walls. Are there any burnt marks anywhere? There's nothing I could see. There's no proof that anything had ever happened, And I'm like,
Wow.
"Am I losing my mind? What's going on here?" You know?
Yeah.
And then I go out into the hallway and I start checking the nurse's office and the doctor's office, and none of them are in yet. They're all locked. There's nothing out there that could have possibly caused this. The only other person in the building is the correctional officer up in the front. And I'm just sitting there like, boom. My mind was completely blown. I was in shock. It's like, what is going on? You know, and
Yeah.
and there
Um.
was no map. There's no roadmap of this. It's like, where's this going? How dangerous is it? What is going on? It's like, how much danger am I in? Uh, there was just no map.
Yeah, because it started off as you believing these are just happening within the person's mind, and then it's almost like these entities are stepping out further and further, almost solidifying the fact that they're showing you, hey, we are entities. We're
Yes,
more than what you thought we were.
yes, and you better back off.
Yeah.
Because this is what we can do. So I didn't think they could affect physical reality, but when that one circumnavigated my office and that crackling went on, it wasn't just short. It wasn't like just for a few seconds. It was like 25 or 30 seconds. It took its good old time, you know. And all the whole time I was like, what is going on? What is happening here? It's like,
Yeah.
I was like just completely confused looking at this guy, and he's acting like he doesn't see or hear anything. He's like in some kind of trance, and this thing's moving toward me on the upper opposite wall, moving right toward my leg, and I'm like, okay, what's going to happen now? And it was like, and then boom, out it went out. So
Yeah.
it was a great relief when he left. So I could, there was no explanation for that. So it took me 3 or 4 months before I got the courage to call him back up and bring him up back to the psychology department and question him. I did not want to see him. I
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
want him anywhere near me. You know? So after about 3 or 4 months, I put out a pass for him to come, and he comes in. He looks good. I thought he'd be a wreck. I thought he'd be an absolute wreck because if he's got something in him that powerful and it's trying to destroy him, I mean, he's going to be a wreck. I was expecting him to be a wreck, but he shows up at my door and he looks good, lots of energy. He looked bright, and I was stunned at that because I was expecting him to be a wreck. And comes in and I tell him, I say, "You look good," and he goes, "Well, I've been doing what you told me. I haven't been able to drive them out, but they haven't gained any ground either." You know, so I start we did some small talk, and then I asked him. I said, "Do you remember the last time you were in here? Did you hear that crackling that went around the office?" He goes, "Yeah, I heard it," but he said, "I was surprised you did." And I said, "What the hell was that?" And he said, "That was them." I said, "Them who? Was that the voices?" He goes, "Yeah, that was the voices." And I said, "Well, what in the blazes were they doing?" He said, "They were trying to scare you off." And I said, "Well, they did a damn good job of it."
Yeah.
And then I asked him, I said, you looked very strange when you got up and get on left my office. I mean, you looked like a zombie." I said, "What were the voices telling you when you were leaving my office?" And he said, "They were telling me to go get a shank and stick it in your gut." And I'm thinking like, he wouldn't do that. I worked with him for 6 months. I know him pretty well. We worked together for a long time. And I said, "Well, why didn't you do it?" Thinking that he'd go, "Well, I wouldn't do that to you." No, instead he said, "I couldn't find one and nobody would give me one."
Jeez.
So it was like, do, 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 do. It was like the outer limits.
Yeah.
It was like, and it was like, where is this going? Where is this going? Because it was like I had walked into another reality. Now the schizophrenics I talked to would understand all this stuff. But I couldn't talk to normal people about any of this. If I tried to talk to my wife, she'd go, "What are you doing poking in the heads of crazy people anyway? You shouldn't be doing that. You stop it now. You do. I don't want you doing that anymore." And I'm like, "Oh my god, yeah, she's not." So it just took me a while to get back on it again, and then it was like it just kept plodding along. You know, um, I started talking to different people, telling them about these patterns. More and more stories showed up. Um, I have one. Here's one of the inmates I was working with. I have a transcript here that I kept from years ago. So this guy completely recovered. Again, it took us about 6 months, but he completely recovered. So when they started recovering, what would happen to me at about 3 o'clock in the morning? I would get crushed down in my bed, and I lived like 17 miles from the prison. So these things knew where I was, and it always
Yeah.
happened that day that they recovered, where they say the voices have left. It's quiet, or they would scream and they would leave. Um, one guy, when they left, they said the silence is deafening because he hadn't heard silence in decades. Um, so this particular guy, he had a long criminal record. Um, he was hearing his mother. Um, he was hearing his mother's voice, and I was suspicious of that because they can fake like they're anybody. They can fake like they're God or Jesus or a mother or a relative, or because they know the relationship.
Yeah.
They can energetically deduce that from the person. So I was real suspicious of his mother, and I kept asking him, "You're hearing from your mother today or this week?" And he go, "Yeah, yeah, I heard from her." "Well, what's she telling you?" "Well, she's telling me to wear clean underwear and stay away from the gangsters and don't use drugs and study in school and all the kind of stuff a mother would say." And I'd say, "Well, did she tell you anything negative at all?" And they go, "No." And that happened month after month after month. The mother was always telling him stuff like the mother.
Yeah. Almost to reassure him, I'm your mother.
I'm still here with you. I'm still here to
Yeah.
help you. And what he
Yeah.
told me is that when the weaker voices came and started badgering him, that the mother would show up and she would chase them away. But when the stronger ones came, she would disappear. So it's like she wanted no part of fighting the bigger ones, but she would chase away the longer ones. So one of the stories he told me was, and he was free of the voices when he did this, so he was no longer hearing voices when he told me this story. He said he was in San Diego one day, and the voices were telling him that they knew where a sesame pop field was up in Oregon, and to go get his go get the money he had in the bank, and get two burlap bags and a machete, and they would show him where this big pot field was up in Oregon. So he's in Southern California, so we're talking over 1,000 miles away.
Yeah.
So he trusted these things, and he goes, okay, okay. Got all this money out of the bank, got the burlap bags and the machete, and he's following what they're telling him step by step. They're telling him where to turn, where to go. So he gets up there, and they tell him to take this dirt road toward the mountain. So he gets on that dirt road and drives scores of miles. Finally, the road dead ends at the mountain, and he goes, "Okay, I can't drive any further. Now what now?" And they said, "There's a hiking trail off to your left. Take your burlap bags and bring your machete. Just keep looking for it. It's off to the left." And he found it, and they told him to keep walking. So he walked for several hours and comes across this giant Sesamilia pot field, just like the voices told him down in San Diego. So he cuts down two burlap bags full of it, gets hikes back down the mountain, and asks the voices, "Okay, well, what do I do with it now?" They tell him, "Well, we know where there's a park where you could sell it." So they tell him where to go to the park, and he starts selling it at the park, and he's making a fortune. And he buys all the prostitutes he wants. He buys all the liquor he wants. He buys all the cocaine he wants, all the alcohol he wants, and he's living up the life of Riley. Like this is perfect for a criminal. He's slowly destroying himself with all these drugs and alcohol, and all these prostitutes. So he does this like I think another two or three times maybe. And one of the things the voices told him, they wanted to go fishing. And I said, "Oh, come on now, you're making this up. You're pulling my leg." He goes,
Yeah.
"No, no, I'm telling you, they were fishermen. They wanted to go fishing." So he said he went and bought a fishing rod and bait, and he went out to the Columbia River, and said he started fishing. And the voices told him where to throw his hook, how long to leave it there, and when to move to another spot. He said he was the only one on the lake, on the river, catching anything that day. So he was catching fish after fish after fish, and then he'd go home, with all the fish, and then he'd drink and use drugs, and have the good old Riley. And about the third time, he says, "Okay, I'm out of money. I got to go up there again." And the voices said, "No, they're waiting for you. If you go up there again, they're going to kill you. They're waiting for you to come. They know you've been robbing their field. Don't go up there." So he went back, and he had more money than when he left. So this is one of the counseling sessions I had with him. So I'm going to take you right into the session with me. So here he comes in this session in the morning, and I ask him, how you doing? He goes, "Doing good." And I asked, "Did you read the book?" He said, "Yeah." I don't remember what book that was. It was some kind of spiritual book. Oh, it's Embraced by the Light. Okay, so it was kind of a spiritual religious book. It was saying, uh, where angels would embrace people. They'd see angels when they were out, that kind of stuff. So it wasn't like a religious book, but it was moving him towards spirituality. So I
Yeah.
figured, okay, if there's a negative side, there's also a positive side. It's a dualistic universe. There's good, there's bad, there's black, there's white. So I'm trying to move them up a little bit in that. So he said, "Yeah, I read it and I liked it a lot." And I said, "How are the voices?" He said, "I can still hear them, but they're not as strong." Okay. So his medications was switched from Haldol to Risperdal, 2 milligrams. So Haldol's pretty strong stuff. And I asked him, "How many of the voices are left now?" He said two. So he started out with like seven. So we would
Wow.
get rid of them one at a time. Okay. And I said, all the other ones are gone now. He said, "Yeah, there's just two left." And he said the weak ones disappeared first. I said, "What are these ones who are with you? What are they telling you right now?" He said, nothing, but I can feel them there. They're taking up space in my head. So this was a common thing. They could feel these voices in there, even when they were quiet. So they knew they were present. There was something in them that knew that these voices were there. So he looked at me with a blank stare, and I told him, I know it's hard to put this stuff into words, as there aren't words for a lot of what you're talking about or what you're experiencing. I said, but do the best you can. He said, well, it's like they're standing in front. It's like they are standing in front of the TV. It's like they're blocking something in my mind. I said, yeah, it's like having a stuffed nose or feeling like something's clogged up. He said, I asked him, I said, when you pray in the past and ask for help getting rid of these things, did they leave? Have you prayed and asked for help about this stuffed up feeling in your head, since you seem to be pretty sure it's them? He goes, yes, it goes away when I pray and ask for help. Okay. So this happened a lot, that if they would pray and ask for their guardian angels to help them, lots of times they would get help. I remember one guy where the voices came back, and I said, well, have you been asking your guardian angels for help? And he said, no. And I said, well, why haven't you been doing that? And I said, they probably got sick of you just acting like a fool and not asking for help. I said, ask for help right now. And he did. And I said, did they come back? And he goes, yeah, they're here now. Okay, well, ask them to get rid of the voices. It's not that simple. Sometimes they'll help out with them. If they're weak, sometimes they'll get rid of them, but they're there, they help. All right. So he says, yeah, when I pray and ask for help, these things go away. And I asked him, I said, how long does it take for that stuffed up feeling to go away after you pray? He uh, says, for how long do you have to pray? He says, I have to pray for hours sometimes. The voices insist there's no God, that praying is a waste of time, that Jesus couldn't save himself. What makes you think he can help you? It's kind of the stuff the voices are telling him. And he said, when they go away, I said, when you feel stuffed up, is there any sign of them returning? He goes, yeah, I get this feeling. I start feeling depressed and stuffed up, like that stuffed up feeling returns. And he goes, I know they're back. And I said, and how long does it take them for them to disappear after you pray and ask for help? He said, sometimes in a few minutes they disappear. Now, he's been working on this for over 6 months. Okay, so this isn't happening quickly. Um, I said, have you ever noticed a difference in your thinking and how you feel when they return? He goes, yes, my thoughts get much more negative. I notice that, and I start worrying about getting cancer, and I get depressed when that stuffed up feeling returns. He had a dream one time where um, the voices told him that he was going to die of cancer in a year, and he knew that if he believed it, he would die. So he turned it down. He didn't believe it. Um, I said, I asked him, I'm asking him here, what have you heard from your mother lately? He said, she said that the Embraced by the Light book was a good book. I said, how did she know about the book? He said, because I read it. I asked my mother why she didn't have the cancer removed sooner. So his mother died of cancer. And the mother she said that she left that up to God and whatever he wanted to do. Then I said, you said that she was kind of touchy about the subject and about answering questions as to why she didn't seek medical help for cancer sooner. How did she react when you asked her about it again this time? Um, he said she hesitated when I asked her. I said, is your mom having any trouble getting through the medicine? He said, no, none at all. And how often does she visit you now? She still comes 2 or 3 times a day. And how long does she stay? 30 seconds to 5 minutes. She has a job as a secretary and she has work to do. And what kinds of things does she talk about when she comes and sees you? Well, last week she was telling me not to mix the colored clothes with the white clothes in the wash. This week she talked to me about the rules of the prison. I was bartering stuff off, trying to make a little extra money. It's no big deal as far as I'm concerned, but it's against the rules. But it allows me to make a little extra money to buy store and the things I wouldn't be able to get normally. He said my mother came and told me to stop that before I got into trouble with the guards. And what did you tell her when she stopped you from doing your little under the table job? I said, right, Mom. And did you quit bartering stuff against the rules? He said, yeah. Did she ever tell you um, about doing that kind of stuff before? He said, yeah. About 3 months ago, I was bartering stuff off, and she said she got on me to stop it. And I said, has she sent you any messages to give to your sister? Okay, so his sister's alive. And he's telling his sister about his mother coming back. He said, yeah, she told me to tell her that she loved her and would be watching over her. He said, I said, I remember that you said that it had been a good while since you had written to your sister. Have you written to her yet? He says, I wrote to her this week and told her to read the Embraced by the Light book. Did you tell her that you were still in touch with your mother and that what your mother said? He goes, yes. And I asked, how did she react? And he said she cried. Did she pass anything back to tell your mom? No. Well, you keep in touch with your sister. We are almost out of time now. I know that you see that the main purpose and goals of the voices is to run you down and make you feel bad as possible. When they succeed in doing this, they get you depressed and drain your energy. You remember when you first got here that all you did was lay around in your bed and sleep all day. You were so depressed you couldn't get up and move. He said, "Yeah. Now you feel good as you can remember in years, don't you?" He said, "Yes." He said, "I'd like you to see you keep chipping away at the voices. I've given you a lot of tactics to use against them. You've already seen their game plan. They drain you. They run you down. They get you to run yourself down. They foster guilt, shame, fear, and anxiety. They give you instructions to get you in trouble with other people. The bottom line is they want you to feel bad. They feed on your pain and anguish. I'd like you to keep reversing that process. This week, I'd like you to do little things like to help yourself feel good. They don't have to be big things, just small things. I want you to do this thing or that thing, buy a candy bar. Um, just do little things to make yourself feel better. So that's kind of like what a session would go. It was like me asking questions. What are the voices saying? How did they react to what I told you to do? Um, until these things kept building up and building up.
Yeah.
So right now, with this Mace Energy method, so as soon as I saw how well that thing worked, I went and got certified in it. You know, I took my time, so it took about a year, but I saw how well it worked. I mean, it works incredibly well. It'll get rid of trauma in an hour, and it'll be totally gone. Works better than any pill I've ever seen. Works better than anything I've ever seen in all the almost 50 years I've been on the front line in mental health. But now I'm seeing two things. The negative identity, which is what the Mace energy method gets rid of, which is negative energy that the ego takes and puts in your mind, in your subconscious mind during a trauma. So when you experience a trauma, there's this horrible feeling and it just lasts forever. Okay? So the ego eventually shows up and goes, hey, let me handle this. I'll deal with it. Takes it and it buries it in your subconscious mind and then it locks it down so it can't get out, but it's still alive. So it's still affecting your behavior, how you act, how you don't act, what you say, what you don't say, your attitude toward life. It's still in there. It's like a computer virus running in the background of a prison, only it's a mind virus running in the background of your mind. The way it manifests itself, say you had your father was very abusive to you as a kid. Right? So every time you see somebody like your father where that trauma is buried, it sets this thing off and it triggers and it goes, that guy's rotten, he's no good. and he doesn't even have to open his mouth. You can sense that you hate him, even though he didn't even say anything. You know? So here's the ego saying, "Okay, beat on him, drive him away, or get away from him." It's a flight or fight response, or just avoid him. And the universe keeps track of it; just keeps sending you people like that to you over and over again. They keep, no matter where you go, they keep showing up. You know, the universe is telling you something's wrong. Your ego is telling you what's wrong is out there, and it's that person. It's not me. Okay? And every time you drive him off, and that thing triggers, it gets stronger. And so it gets to the point where you start believing, well, that's just who I am. When I see these kind of people, I just react negatively. That's just who I am. But it's not who you are. So Mace can go in there and remove that thing. And from that moment on, there is no reaction to people like that ever again. And anybody like them, there's no reaction to either. So
Wow.
that's what we call a negative identity. Now, the negative entities are a totally different story. Okay? They also affect you, but so does this program running in the back of your mind. So even if we can't get rid of the voices, if you get rid of that garbage that's in your mind from all these traumas, and you can't live on this planet without traumas. I mean, you're going to get traumatized somewhere at some time. It's going to happen. And the ego is going to take it and bury it in your subconscious, and then that thing's going to be triggering the rest of your life. It's so sad when I work with these elderly ladies. They're 65, 70 years old. Something happened to them bad when their dad or mom did something to them that traumatized them when they were 7 years old, and they concluded from whatever happened to them that they were worthless. That they were no good, that they would never find love. And here they are; they never have. You know, for their entire life, they've been running with this negative identity that's been driving their behavior and their thoughts. And once we get rid of it, it's gone. It's totally gone. They don't feel like they're worthless anymore. They don't feel like they're stupid anymore. Or whatever caused that trauma, it's gone. Okay? So you can go to my website and go to articles, or not articles. You can go to the videos, and there's some videos on my website about the Mace Energy Method. Okay? So if you're interested in trying it out, you can you can click the consult button, and there will be paperwork that came up that you can send in to me, and I'll put you on the schedule. But I've never seen anything work as well as this stuff does. Yeah. So it will weaken the voices even if it doesn't get rid of them. Okay? So the voices are spiritual. They're a spiritual dilemma. You know, you have to you have to start increasing your vibration. You have to start moving, getting on a spiritual path, and stay there. Now, psychiatry never mentions spirituality. Psychology never mentions spirituality. Nothing in formal education mentions spirit. And we are
Yeah.
spirits. This is a machine. We're driving around in a biological machine. You know? It's a spirit that's driving the thing. You know? And your spirit's energy. So the way Mace works is that positive energy, which is your spirit, will absorb negative energy. All you got to do is make the connection. Once you make the connection between this garbage that's buried and that negative energy, the spirit will take it and transmute it and turn it into positive energy and return it back to you. So these people actually feel more energy when we're done because that negative energy is gone. It's not there anymore. So
Yeah.
the
So it's not
positive
like
energy,
it's removing. It's not like it's removing like the memory per se of
no,
that. It's just removing that negative aspect
it's for
of it.
removing the negative charge. So they can still
Yeah.
remember it. So when you ask them, I mean, this horrendous thing happened to them. And then at the end of the session, I'll say, okay, now go back to that horrible thing that happened to you. You know, just visualize everything around you just the way it was back then. I said, how do you feel about it now? And they go, nothing. I remember it, but it doesn't bother me anymore. It's gone in an hour. Something that plugged them their entire lifetime.
Yeah.
Of course, the deep state, the psychiatric, psychological mafia don't want this out. They don't want it out there.
Why cure a problem when you can just treat it forever?
Yeah, after usually about 3 or 4 sessions, most of the garbage is gone, and they come out of it a different person. They feel better. They look better. They have more energy. You know, and it works so much better than pills. This should be being done in all the prisons and all the mental health centers and in the VA. I mean, it treats PTSD very well. Does an excellent job with PTSD. Yeah. No, the guys who came up with it, John Mace, who came up with this, he wasn't a psychologist or a psychiatrist. He was a master mariner. He was a ship captain. He drove these big freighters back and forth across the ocean all the time. You know? And he had to know about magnetism. He had to know about electricity. He had to know about electrical fields. So all this stuff he learned as a ship captain, he transferred that knowledge to how the human being worked. With the spirit being the main energy source, with the negative identities being negative polarity, the negative pole on a battery, and energy moves from negative to positive. So he found that the spirit will, if you connect these things, the spirit will absorb it and it will disappear. That negative energy will vanish. It won't be there anymore. The trick he had, uh, the hardest part he had was where does the ego bury that stuff in the subconscious. It took him years to figure that out. But once he did, he had a system that actually worked. And there's not a lot of us out there now. I think in the world there's about 40 of us. Not too much more than that. But the system was developed in Australia.
Wow, that's a lot of work for 40 people. I mean, with all the trauma that's in the world.
Well, they don't know of it. People
Yeah.
don't know it exists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you doing things like this, because I know a lot of people have asked you on their show, uh, and it just makes it better for you to get that word out and share that, so that more and more people can learn about it.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do. I mean, what the psychiatric mafia is doing is disgusting. It just totally disgusts me. Like I said, there's a place for that. But to tell these people that they have to take these toxic meds for the rest of their life, it's unconscionable. And
Absolutely.
the whole Western mental health system is just like that. They're all like that.
Oh yeah, I
And
remember when it's so funny you were talking about how the spirit, like the entities, take people's energies away from them and just like leave them kind of like in a lethargic state. And remember, they had taught us when we were learning about schizophrenia that the best thing you can do for a schizophrenic was let them sleep because it was the only time they had relief.
yeah,
So like they would sleep for hours and you should just let them sleep. Meanwhile, you're like, no, we need to give them their energy back, give them their life back.
well, their sleep is not undisturbed either because the voices put nightmares in their
Hmm.
sleep. So they don't want them to sleep because it weakens them.
Yeah,
So they want to keep them awake as long as possible. They don't want them to sleep because they're more vulnerable if they don't sleep. So the voices have more control. So what they're slowly trying to do is push the original personality out and take over. Now I have a
Almost
poem
like a
here.
possession.
Yes, they're moving toward that. The more control they have, the more energy they can generate because they have, they're doing to us and all of us. It's not just schizophrenics. They're doing to us what we do to cows. You put them out to pasture, they eat grass, they produce milk. You bring them in, isolate them, milk them, take their milk, and put them out, and do it again. That's what they're doing to us. You can call them archons or evil spirits, but they're out there. And look what's happening in the world right now. Look at all the misery. Look at 500,000 Ukrainians killed in this stupid, insane war that they never had a chance of winning. The U.S. providing arms to an army that's already been defeated. Yeah, it's insane what they're doing. We're on the verge of
Yeah.
nuclear war right now because of these lunatics who are crawling with these kind of entities. You look at them. Trudeau's out. He's a nutcase. Biden's a nutcase. Germany's a nutcase. France is a nutcase. Here's what's his name in France saying, "Well, France, we're gonna go into Ukraine and we're gonna friggin' fight the Russians." they would get their ass kicked all the way across the continent. You know, they
Yeah.
sent in a couple hundred troops, and they in a few days 7 of them ended up in body bags. You know, they're nuts. Even
Yeah.
NATO could not take on Russia right now, and they're still pushing. They're still poking Russia in the eye.
Mhm.
Still
Yeah.
shooting rockets up, hitting Moscow until Putin's the friggin' adult in the classroom right now. He's the adult on the playground. Showed so much restraint. It's incredible. He could have blown the crap out of Ukraine anytime he wanted to. He could have hit NATO bases. He could have sunk friggin' Britain. He's got no intention of. He just wants what he said. He wants a barrier. He doesn't want NATO right on his doorstep. And what they found, 30 friggin' biochemical biolabs on the border with Russia, CIA run biolabs. He found all those. Just within the last couple of days, several hundred NATO generals and colonels and high ranking officers have been blown up in bunkers in Ukraine. They're running this war. They're,
Yeah.
it's not Ukraine who's shooting those missiles. It's contractors paid for by the US and Germany and NATO to shoot these missiles into Russia. It's taking satellite information from NATO, from the United States to, to program these missiles, and very trained technicians to program them to hit a target hundreds of miles away. It's not the Ukrainians doing this, and the Russians know it. So they finally got fed up and said, "We're going to blow the crap out of you. Keep this up, you're going to pay. You're not going to get away with it." So now they're thinking about it. Like they're
Yeah.
lunatics. They want a war. They want a war.
Yeah. Well, they want to keep us all in that negative state, that negative
Right. And look at the
that
the
negative
amount of
energy.
misery. Look at the amount of misery all this is causing. Look at all the wounded, the tens of thousands of wounded soldiers that are going to be suffering for the rest of their lives. Look at all the families who have lost family members who are in deep depression right now. These things are having a hog's fest off of these maniacs who are running the
Yep.
Western countries right now.
Yeah.
Now, what I have here, I can read you is a poem of a prisoner who had been completely taken over by these things. Okay? And
Wow.
he wrote a poem about it. So his mother sent me this poem, and I just kind of kept it. So he had killed 3 people in a drug deal, and he murdered his girlfriend and cut her into little pieces. Okay?
Jeez.
They still have not found her body. Okay? So here he is writing about the voices. He wrote this poem about the voices. Uh, he says, "There is a monster that lives in my head. This monster is real. It's not under my bed. My monster tells me things to do. It tells me sometimes when the news is new." Um, so it's telling him things that he wouldn't otherwise know. He said,
Yeah.
"My monster is crying as it spent all of the years drowning out my courage and disposing my fears. My monster is strong. That's what I like to think. My monster is coming when it's time to drink." So when he drinks, he gets psychotic, gets crazy. He said, "My monster is ready. My monster is strong. What will I do when my monster is gone?" So a lot of times in the prison, they didn't want to get rid of the voices because they get supernaturally strong when when they get into a fight, when they get angry. I mean, supernaturally strong. It's like a little 150-pound prisoner can bounce 2 big guards around the inside of his cell like popcorn. I mean,
Jeez.
I've heard and seen things that just you just can't believe the strength that they get. It's not human strength. It's far exceeds that. Okay? So he goes, uh, "My monster will never leave. That's his plan. It overwhelms me when I'm making a stand." Okay, so when he gets in trouble, the monster takes over. Okay? And these guys are hard to beat in a fight. Gangsters don't mess with them. Okay? "There's a monster inside of me. I thought I was strong. How could this be? My monster has a name too. He walks in the dark whispering Yazoo. My monster is watching me. He won't tell me his name. My monster is the shadows you cannot see. His heart is heavy. He plays for the game. My monster is aware. He wants to be monster. He's as blood from a lake. His bond is with me, now monster. He has nothing else to do. My monster is aware. And those are the words of somebody completely taken over. He's on maximum security block in a Colorado prison right now in isolation. He's so
Wow.
dangerous they can't put him in general population. He almost killed his mother.
Wow. Just that last line of like it's real. This monster is real.
And it's
Have you
aware.
found any like similarities in people that suffer from schizophrenia, like, or is it just random?
What kind of similarities?
Like just as in like like similar traumas, drug use, like is there anything
Oh yeah.
specific?
There's always a trauma.
Okay.
Virtually all of them have suffered some horrendous physical, sexual, emotional, or physical abuse. I mean, it's always there. Very seldom is it not there. Sometimes all of a sudden the voices will just show up out of nowhere, but that's very unusual. That's the usual thing is the trauma, the damage. So look at what they're doing with these wars. Look at all the trauma they're causing. How many of those people are going to come out of those wars psychotic? Worthless, useless people. So these things are hitting us all.
Yeah.
Not just the
So you think
schizophrenics.
it's just like kind of I wouldn't say like, I don't know, like an overarching darkness to like kind of keep us at like a lower vibration, lower frequency to
That's exactly
keep
what's
us
happening.
open for the darkness.
Yep. That's exactly what's happening. They want, they, they pretty much rule this planet right now. I mean, they're making their stand. If we lose this election, then we're gone. The whole planet's gone. All Europe will go down with us.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
Do you think that like for someone that's just starting to suffer with like the beginning like inklings of voices or negative thoughts, is there anything that they can do to like try to fight that away or overcome them before
Well,
they take over?
the most important thing they need to realize, because there's always this battle when the voices show up. Like, what is this? Who is this? Is this me? You know, is it something else? They don't know what it is. And
Mhm.
because everybody from the time you're a kid, you experience your thoughts in your mind, you think that every thought that comes into your mind belongs to you. That's far from true. Far from true. Manuel Swedenborg, a Christian mystic who lived 300 years ago, said none of your thoughts belong to you. They either come in from heaven or they come in from hell. You're the one who chooses which ones you want to listen to. And the Native Americans have the same thing. They said, well, you got a wolf over each shoulder. The one you pay attention to is the one that's going to grow the strongest. So, first thing they got to understand is that the voices are not who they are. They're separate from them. Their intention is separate from them. So when the voice tells you to do something that you know is going to get you into trouble, that's not your intention. It's not your intention to get in trouble, to destroy yourself, to ruin your chances of getting a job or get in fight with people. That's not your intention. That's not the intention of your spirit. That's the intention of something else.
Mhm.
People standing on the edge of a bridge going, I wonder what it would be like to jump. I talked to a preacher once who was standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, and all of a sudden the voice burst into his head, just jump. Go ahead and jump. These 50,000 people who kill themselves in the U.S. every year, that doesn't happen suddenly. There's a thought that comes in their head telling them, you're no good, you're worthless, you're not going anywhere, you're miserable. Just go ahead and kill yourself. Just end it all.
And the number of those people just increases as the
Yep,
years
it's
go on.
increasing every year. Every year. We're not getting better. We're not getting mentally more healthy. We're getting worse. And those drugs are making things worse. It's like, they're drugging kids now. I mean, what they're
Yeah.
doing to kids. Now this is from like 2017. It's much worse right now, but back in 2017, there were more than 7.2 million kids on psychiatric drugs. Over 622,000 of them were under the age of 5. These drugs destroy your brain. They rot out your
Yeah.
nervous system. They're not good for you. You know,
Oh yeah.
over 80,000 of them were on ADHD drugs, which is amphetamine. And
Mhm.
Yeah.
you wonder
That
why
was
we got
my
so many amphetamine freaks on the planet right now.
yeah, that was my younger brother. Um he was just a kid, hyperactive kid,
Yeah,
and and they basically said, "Oh, hey, here you go. Take this pill. It'll help calm you down." All it did was put him in a zombified state.
yeah,
That was it. It didn't really help anything. Um, I know during that time as well, he would also have these like night terrors of he. It would either be things crawling all over him, like spiders or something.
yeah.
Oh,
That's
that's
them.
that to scare him a lot,
Yeah,
and got to a point where we were like, okay, don't take them anymore
yeah,
because
good,
you're not yourself.
good. Yeah, yeah. And when I was working in the prison, I never saw so many people who had gone psychotic on methamphetamine. It's one of the
Yeah,
most
Mhm.
dangerous drugs out there. And they start off using it and they go, "Oh, this feels great. I can stay up forever and party and I feel wonderful and I have lots of energy." You know, and then they crash and while they're high, they start hearing voices. They go, "Oh, that's just a hallucination. When I come down, the voices will go away." And it does. When they come down, the voices disappear. So they go, "Oh yeah, well that proves it's a hallucination." So they keep using it. They hear them. They hear the voices come on again, and that goes on for a while. And then one day, the voices don't go away. They're there forever. They're permanently there. They will not leave. You know, Hundreds and hundreds of them.
Oh
You know,
yeah. We had a guy, a homeless man in our old neighborhood called Crazy John, and the story was that because he was schizophrenic, he would just scream at things that weren't there, and when you looked into his eyes, they weren't in this world. They were looking
yeah,
at something out, like looking beyond you. And everyone said like he was a normal guy, but he was a drug addict and he just kept doing drugs, doing drugs, doing drugs, and like essentially, put himself in this permanent state of not, in this world. But I just remember seeing him and thinking like this guy is just like he's trapped in his head. Like there's no getting him out.
right. So then the only thing they say is drugs. So
Mhm.
there's over 38,000. This was back then. 38,534 kids on antidepressants. 85,000 on antipsychotic drugs. These are the drugs that destroy your brain. Kids, they're putting kids on these things. You know, over 369,000 on drugs for anxiety, which is those drugs are addictive.
Oh yeah, I
yeah,
I know, and it's so funny because when I was on antidepressants, coming off of them was like the worst withdrawal of
Yes,
my life. I thought I was going to die. I could not even move without like my head like feeling like electric zaps in my brain, motion sickness. It was like, what did I do to myself?
yeah. Wellbutrin is one of those drugs. And
Hmm.
that works out fine for them because you start withdrawing, you feel awful. You go, well, I'm just going to keep taking it.
Yeah. Oh
That's what
yeah.
they want. That's exactly what they want.
yeah. I mean,
Uh,
this whole conversation has been, in a way, in many ways, insightful. Just because these are things that she has talked about herself, things that she felt or things that she thought. So once she was like, I found somebody who is discussing these things, and it's almost like some of my thoughts came out, and somebody is saying them.
yeah, I
Uh,
get that from a lot of people. Thank God you're out there telling the truth.
Yeah.
There's, there was there's some other stuff from graduate school. There was this was funny. Uh, I wrote a story on it. It's called the pipe. Okay? So there were a couple of things that happened at the state hospital. I remember one time I was on the first floor of the psychiatric unit, and the maintenance men were cutting. There, there was this banister, which was a hollow pipe that went up to the second floor. The cap on the second floor was missing. Okay, so it was just a hollow pipe that all the way went down. There was a cap on the bottom of the stairwell. Right. So for some reason, this maintenance man was cutting the cap off of the bottom of the stairwell of the banister, that hollow pipe that went up into the second floor. And it was the most interesting thing happening right then. So I stopped and I was watching the sparks fly all over the place. And there was a bunch of psychiatric patients standing there, and I just joined them, and we were all watching the sparks fly. It was like the 4th of July on the first floor. And when that cap fell off, this cascade of thousands of pills fell out of that banister. It was like
Wow.
a waterfall of pills, and it just kept coming and coming and coming, and they spread out all over the floor. There were thousands of them. They'd been dumping their pills down there for decades. Who knows? And I'm looking at that, and the first thought that came into my mind, and most of them were antipsychotic drugs. The first thought that came into my mind is each one of those pills is a vote for one of these patients to stay insane.
Yeah.
Why is that? You know, because even though these medicines were bad, they would bring them back to sanity. You know, in a lot of cases, they could function, they could go to
Mhm.
school, but as soon as they stopped taking the pills, they right back. You know, the voices would come right back. You know, so they would bring them back to sanity as long as they were taking those pills. You know, and of course the psychiatric mafia and big pharma love that. So that was one thing that stuck in my mind, and the question was, why are they not taking their pills? You know, I was, and that got into the poisoning thing I talked to you about earlier, where the
Yeah.
voices
Yeah.
are telling them they're being poisoned. But there was another interesting incident that happened. Um, they call this the Dr. Freud thing. Uh, one of my good friends was working on another psychiatric unit, and I went to visit him over there one day, and out comes this guy smoking a pipe with this like formal jacket on, a white shirt and tie, and acting like Mr. Aloof. And I look at that guy and I'm like, who the hell's that? I asked my friend. I said, Ed, who is that guy? He goes, oh, that's our psychiatrist. We call him Dr. Freud. So he's he's dressed up like Dr. Freud. He's smoking a pipe
Uh,
like Dr.
Mhm.
Freud. He thinks he's Dr. Freud working in the state psychiatric hospital. So I'm like, you know. So one of the things they told us in undergraduate school that schizophrenics are too disoriented or too disorganized to do advanced planning. Okay, I remember that. And so what happened is one of this guy's patients, Dr. Freud's patients, got pissed off at him for something. Probably over medicating him or something. And one day, what he did is he was up on like the second floor. So this patient had to make it past two attendance stations to get to the floor where the Dr. Freud's office was. So at like 4 in the morning, he gets past two attendance stations. He gets onto the office unit where the psychiatrist's office is. He somehow breaks into his office, gets into his office, squats down in the middle of his desk, and takes a crap right in the middle of his desk, and then shapes
Jeez.
it into a pipe, and then
Wow.
escapes from the hospital. And here they were teaching, oh, they're too disorganized. They can't do advanced
Yeah.
planning. They
Yeah.
can't. They're too screwed up to do anything like that. So that was another lie that I caught them in.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, Jerry, I really appreciate you coming on the show. This has been an awesome conversation. Uh, once I went through your work and when she finished telling me about it and we talked about you. We were really excited about this, and yeah, it's just been an awesome conversation that we've had. So we really both of us appreciate talking to you today.
Yeah, I didn't know what to do when I saw induced fear. I'm like, I don't want to
Yeah,
induce fear into people. Who are these guys? But
yeah,
I'll talk to anybody who will listen.
yeah. I just felt like it was a good match of the ask questions and face your fears, and you definitely asked the questions that everybody was afraid to do.
Yeah, it definitely inspires hope to those that are like suffering and you're told you're gonna suffer for your whole life without medicate with
Oh,
medication and I think you just giving an alternative and just being out there saying like, listen, this isn't you, this is something else, and you can, get through it is such a
yeah,
wonderful thing because so many doctors out there are like, this is your life forever.
right.
There's no hope. Take
It is.
this pill.
It's not a life sentence.
And
You
I think
can
that's so
break
great.
out of it.
Yeah, that you're out there not only doing the research, but actively helping people in a real way. And it's just like it's so good because when you're in that state of mind, you're so desperate that you're
Yeah,
willing to take the pills. You're
right.
Yeah,
willing to believe that you can't ever get through it. And it's just so nice to have someone that's like, listen, there's hope at the end.
Yeah, there's things you can do. There's definitely things you can do. But past a certain point, you're gone.
Mhm.
I remember one guy I worked with for over an hour just to talk to what was left of who he used to be before the voices took him over. I've got story
wow,
after story after story of patients I've worked with. All these
yeah,
things you see behind me are stories of patients I've worked with.
wow,
Yeah, and I think it's great because there's also like in your work, you're destigmatizing schizophrenia because like the idea of schizophrenia is like you're just crazy and that's it. And so a
Right.
lot of
Your
people
brain
will
is
keep it
broken.
quiet.
yeah,
Yeah, like that's it for you and you don't want to tell people like, "Hey, I hear voices and I'm crazy." But you're out here saying like, "Listen, there are things you can do.
yeah,
You're not crazy per se." And I think
You know,
that's a great thing too.
there's a lot of people out there working and hearing voices.
Mhm.
I know two nurses uh, and one psychologist who were out there working, hearing voices. And they just keeps them under control. That they don't listen to them while they're working, and they try to tune them out afterwards. But they know what they are.
yeah,
Yeah.
You know?
And that's so important because it's like I think people a lot again with schizophrenia it's like this unknown and because even in psychology like they're like we don't know the cause, we don't know this, but you're putting a face to the disease. You're like, listen, there are things you can do and like this is the source as
yeah.
opposed to just believing like it comes from nowhere.
And the
Yeah,
fact that you provide your work rather than just saying this is what I say, so listen to it. You're like, these are the reasons why I was led to where I'm at today. This is why I believe this method helps. And you can view all of that. You have your book in which you talk about these things. You have your website with there's also testimonials on there. So you provide the work for people to see rather than just saying take my word for it.
yeah, yeah. I had enough of take my word for it,
Yeah.
especially
Well,
when I found out the copious lies that these people are putting out. It's just
yeah,
and people don't
yeah,
know any better. They don't know any
They
better.
don't. They
no,
don't. That's why I feel like some people go towards the medicine because it's like that's the only cure. That's my only hope. And again, like modern medicine makes you believe any other alternative route is just wrong.
Right,
Their
right.
PR is so good.
yeah,
They're like, "Oh,
Yeah,
you're just crazy." Like, you know
yeah.
what I mean? But
That's quackery. It's all quackery.
yeah,
mhm.
You know, this is the only real treatment is pills.
Yep.
That's like the medical system. Like I said, it was taken over by the millionaires back in the 50s,
Mhm.
yeah,
you see what they've done with it. Now look at medical costs; they're
Yeah.
astronomical. Like you were saying, it costs $5 a pill. They're charging like 70 for it.
yeah.
And then they wonder why
Mm.
medical costs are so astronomical. It's because they're ripping us off
Yep.
and getting away with
And
it. They control the Congress.
they
The
do.
pharmaceutical industry controls the Congress and the Senate. They paid them off. They're all turncoats.
I know, and then doctors are incentivized to sell the pills because, they want to keep their license. You have to do what is told to you. It's just it's a losing battle, but it's good to have people like you out there that it's like, hey, listen, here's another way.
Yeah, wake up. Look at what's happening.
Mhm. Oh yeah.
If you want to let people know, like a website, the website that we've mentioned a couple of times, like I'll also put it into the description below if you want to tell them where they can find you, where they can find your work and things like that.
Yeah, they can go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. The last name is Marzinsky. The first time is Jerry, Jerry. And if you want to sign up for a mace lesson, there's a consult button there. You can just push that, and you'll be sent an application. There's videos there where we talk about mace with some other therapists. You can go watch those videos if you're curious about what it is and how it operates.
Right? Yeah. Going through your website, you make it very easy for people to to have
Um,
to get their help.
yeah, or you can write me at JAMARZ and the number one at outlook.com. I'll answer you if I have time.
Yeah. Yeah, you're a very busy man. That's why I was like, if you have the time, I would very much appreciate it. And it worked out. So again, we very much appreciate it. To everybody listening, hopefully you go. I would suggest you go to his website, view the Mace Energy Method. Do you also have a YouTube channel where you have your own videos or anything like that?
I have channels on YouTube. Yeah. Um,
Okay,
yeah, so you can do a search on YouTube, on BitChute, on Rumble, Odyssey. I've I've got uh, I've got stuff posted on all those places.
sweet. I will definitely share that with everybody in the description below. Thank you, Jerry, again for being on the show. This
You're
was
more than
awesome.
welcome. Thanks for having me.
All
Yeah.
right. And to everybody listening, don't forget to ask questions and face your fears. Thanks for joining me, Katie, and Jerry Marzinsky on this episode of Induced Fear. Bye, guys.